at Fordham University Law. I actually graduated from John Jay. I am one of the panelists. Our moderator is running a little bit late, so I'm going to get it started, and then she'll take over when she comes. This is Max Isle from the International Jewish Anti-Zionist Network. This is Khury Peterson-Smith from Black for Palestine and a professor, a postdoc at Tufts University. This is Jonathan Buchsbaum, sorry, with CUNY and the Professional Staff Congress. So first off, I just want to ask if there are any members of law enforcement to please identify yourselves, or anybody from any Zionist organizations. All right, good. So this is being recorded by the Left Forum, and it's also being live streamed. So just for everyone's information. So I will just start out briefly. So I graduated from John Jay, which is a CUNY, and when I was a freshman at John Jay, I started Students for Justice in Palestine here, and there were really barely any political groups on campus. All of the students of color were involved in like cultural groups, but nothing really political. So we were really the first of our kind, and so the school was didn't know what to do with us. We did a lot of daring things. We had die-ins on campus, and of course the Zionist student groups responded by accusing us of anti-Semitism, all the norm, getting the media involved. So I thought that it would be appropriate just to give a little bit of a background on the history of CUNY. So the first public college in New York City opened in 1847. In 1968, after World War II, CUNY became what the Board of Trustees called 100% open admissions. But of course, their idea of open admissions was very different from what that would mean for Black and brown students. A lot of the reasons why they did this was because of deindustrialization after World War II. There were as many industrial jobs that these Black and brown youth could work in, and they feared an uprising, basically, by increasingly frustrated Black and brown youth who had no outlet to higher education and no way to get into the workforce. In 1969, these Black and brown students who were in the CUNY system, again, had a very different idea of what an open university would mean to them, and so they organized protests on campus. They organized sit-ins on campus that were very, very successful, where they would actually occupy their universities, and they had a number of demands, which included having these Black and brown students involved in the employment in picking professors who would be teaching them, in making sure that there were specific programs for Black and brown students, so that when they were coming from their segregated public schools and didn't have the same kind of education that their white counterparts had, they would be able to get the same or the same opportunities, so that when they graduated, they would be successful in the workforce. Sorry, just to interrupt. This is Nerdeen Kiswani. She's going to be moderating. I just started because she is with NYC Students for Justice in Palestine. We both were the co-founders of NYCSJP about 2 years ago.
Yeah, hi everybody. I'm really sorry that I'm late. Just had like a little bit of trouble at the front. Like she said, my name is Nerdeen Kiswani. I graduated from CUNY a year ago. Was part of Hunter, the College of Staten Island, both Hunter College and the College of Staten Island SJPs, as I took class at both of them. So I have like a lot of experience, particularly with Students for Justice in Palestine and the backlash that we face on CUNY campuses, which also helped me and Leena and a bunch of other students from these different campuses create New York City Students for Justice in Palestine, which would take it, off the campus and help kind of lift off the burden that we faced as students on campus, because at some point it got to be unbearable. But yeah, I'm just going to let you continue.
Yeah. So Nerdeen and I have been organizing together for like 6 years. We grew up together and then organized together in CUNY, and then started NYCSJP when we both graduated, or when we were about to graduate. So yeah. So Nerdeen. So yeah. Feel free to, because I'm just giving like a background on the history of CUNY. So feel free to jump in at any point. So the sit-ins were very, very successful. CUNY did become actually tuition free for a brief period of time, but of course there was a lot of backlash by neoliberals, the administration. So in 1970, when the economy was really bad, particularly in New York City, New York needed money, so they went to New York State. The state basically told them, we'll help you on one condition. You have to get rid of a lot of these public programs that you have. One of them was education, of course. So what they had to do is they had to basically transfer the cost back to the students and continue to increase rapidly the tuition for the students at CUNY. Another way that they saved money is by decreasing the quality of the education that these students were getting, by maximizing class sizes, by getting rid of a lot of the programs that the students had won for these black and brown students from low income students to help them adjust and to help compensate for the segregated public schools that they were coming from. So they got rid of a lot of those programs. They started no longer hiring full-time faculty members and who would become tenured, and instead just hire adjunct professors who they can fire in an instant. So that's CUNY has a huge history of resistance. It's one of the largest public university systems in the country. Has one of the most, the largest black and brown student populations in the country. So one thing that's really important to mention, a very recent development. In June 2016, the CUNY administration tried to introduce policy on expressive conduct. So basically what they were trying to do was just institutionalize what they were already doing. So their policy said, any students who want to engage in any form of political expression, assembly, protest, their ability to do that is under our discretion. So we decide whether you can protest, we decide whether you can engage in assembly, we decide whether you can engage in a specific kind of political expression. So there was a lot of backlash by the students, mostly students of color, mostly low-income students who organized against that, protested against that. A lot of team members, and the board backed down and basically said that they were indefinitely postponing that vote. So that was a huge success. That was very recent. This happened in the context of the Zionist organization writing a 16-page report to the CUNY Chancellor Milliken, accusing SJPs all around New York of anti-Semitism, demanding that CUNY, Justice Palestine, just in case anybody's not familiar with the acronym, demanding that every SJP be suspended, and basically accusing the university of not protecting its Jewish students and not responding to anti-Semitism. In response, the university hired private investigators, private attorneys, to conduct a 6-month investigation into the claims of anti-Semitism. This is basically unprecedented for CUNY. When the NYPD came into the Muslim student associations and was spying on students on our campuses for years, and the school became aware of it because they claimed that they didn't know before that the NYPD was in the school. We don't know if that's true, but whatever. When they became aware of it, they did nothing. They issued a bullshit, excuse my language, statement to the students apologizing, saying that they expressed their support to their Muslim students, but doing nothing to actually offer material support. But then when the Zionist organization accuses students of anti-Semitism and really don't have a single founded claim, they hire these private investigators, spend probably, I went to these investigators' offices, these were these attorneys' offices. They were paying them a lot of money per hour. Let me just tell you that. They were where was their office? In
Fifth Avenue.
Fifth Avenue.
Yeah. Park Avenue.
Yeah, Park Avenue, gorgeous building. Anyways, so that's where our tuition money was going.
Also, if I could add, it was the same law firm that was recently involved in protecting and they were representing a police officer that I believe shot an unarmed black teen. I think it was. I'm not sure. I think it was Peter. His officer's name was Peter.
The one who actually ended up.
Yeah. So I mean, it also is amazing how they draw these comparisons and these connections for us. You know, the same people who they're hiring to represent police officers that are shooting unarmed black teenagers are the same ones that they're using to try and like curtail and stop the free speech of Students for Justice in Palestine and Palestinian students all across CUNY campuses. And that also goes to show like the NYPD is not gonna not hire like the best that they can find,
yeah,
you know,
exactly.
when it comes to these things.
To defend
CUNY
themselves.
is like putting their money out for.
Yeah. So after the report was concluded, it was 6 investigation. They interviewed students, professors, staff, witnesses, students on both sides, right? So they interviewed students who were corroborating these claims of anti-Semitism or were accusing students of anti-Semitism, and then they interviewed people involved with SJP, and then I guess more neutral people, whatever that means. So they ended up releasing their report saying that not a single founded claim of anti-Semitism, that they couldn't find one actual instance of anti-Semitism besides maybe being something that was like, if they said if there was anything, it was individualized and not like something that SJP was involved in or that SJP promoted or supported in any way. So basically cleared our name. While this investigation was going on, the New York State Senate threatened to pull $500,000 from CUNY's budget, specifically citing CUNY's failure to respond to accusations of anti-Semitism. So CUNY hired these expensive attorneys, investigators, to respond to these claims of anti-Semitism, which they don't do ever. And then the New York State Senate says, we're going to pull $500,000 from your funding because you're not doing enough. Specifically citing SJP, right? This was at the time when the CUNY student movement was very, very like prominent, when we were calling for open admissions again. And so this was a very particular strategy that they did to isolate SJPs from the other student movements on campus. To say, you guys are asking for free tuition, well, we're pulling more money and it's because of SJP, right? So it was a very strategic move on their part.
It was the height of the Million Student March, you know, to give a backdrop, which was happening on campuses all across the country, and SJP was one of the leading organizations that was, you know, pulling that off in CUNY. You know, I remember we were outside of Hunter, outside of, you know, at the College of Staten Island, all these different campuses on the same day. Some of the same students going to these different campuses from borough to borough on the same day, demanding, you know, free tuition, demanding for $15 minimum wage for like staff. Not staff, I mean like, you know, employees at the school, you know, like cafeteria workers and things like that, demanding all these things, and they suddenly like thrust this in our face at the same time that we're also going through, you know, exams and all of these things, putting all this pressure on us as students. You know, at what time are you going to find when you're being like accused of all these things and you're trying to organize and then you're trying to just, you know, pass your classes and, you know, live a normal life. And even to contextualize it even deeper, I was part of Hunter SJP at the time, and a lot of the clubs have our own club rooms, and we were kind of producing a lot of the materials for the protests and rallies out of the Hunter SJP club room. And at the same time that this was happening, we were suspended for an unrelated reason that they found out later that it was actually unconstitutional and not allowed them to suspend us. So they actually locked us out of our club room. They deactivated our key card, so we didn't have access to any of our materials, our meeting space, you know, all these things, like these kind of nuanced events that happen that nobody hears about. And we don't even have the time. We have to literally go out there and organize our own defense, let alone go out there and organize telling people what's happening about us, and then let alone even for Palestine. Yeah. Like, you have to jump through like 3-4 hoops before you even talk about like what's happening and why we even started SJP in the first place.
Yeah. So just a little bit more background on CUNY's direct material support of Israel. So is everybody familiar with G4S? I'm sorry. It's like a British multinational security corporation. They fund prisons in the U.S. and in Israel. They fund interrogation rooms, the checkpoints, the Israeli dungeons which Palestinians are kept in. So of the $257,000 that CUNY's invested into private prisons, 90% of that goes to G4S. Yeah. Right? So besides like the neoliberal academic curriculum they are materially supporting the occupation, right? They're materially supporting these checkpoints and these interrogation rooms and these prisons that Palestinians are put in every day. Like Nerdeen said, what the administration really does is they just try to make organizing extremely difficult for us in every way possible. They make us jump through holes. They make us go through extra steps to have an event approved, to have speakers approved. They one time told us here at John Jay that before a speaker is approved, they have to give a list of speaking points that has to be approved by the administration. Yeah, like
freedom of expression.
Yeah, unbelievable. This was after Remy Kazi came to school, read some poetry. A Hillel student got very upset by it and went to the administration. They tried to do that in response. We, of course, didn't stand for 1 second. They backed down very quickly. A lot of it is them trying to see what will take and how far they can go. We had a die-in where they tried to tell us that we weren't allowed to use any white sheets with blood on it. We, of course, didn't. They told us this a half an hour before our event was supposed to start. Called us into the office, told us, you can't do this. It's a safety concern, all of this bullshit. We ended up doing it anyways. The Hillel students got like the New York Times, the New York Post, to write reports on us, calling us anti-Semitic, saying that we were saying anti-Semitic things at the die-in. And this was like a die-in for Ferguson and Gaza because it was right after the summer that all of that had happened. So yeah, just like loops that they make us jump through to make it absolutely impossible for us to organize, while also being students, while also many of us being low-income students who work, who have family commitments. So the things that they put us through, they don't put any other student club through. And it's because they know that these Hillel students have the Zionist Organization of America behind them. They know that they have elected officials behind them who are going to threaten to pull funding like they did with Brooklyn College, like they did with the entire CUNY. So
yeah, just to sum it up, like the student kind of section of the pushback on SJP on campuses. You know, these campuses, and it's not just in CUNY, we have like experience here, but all over the country I hear the same stories, whether they use bureaucratic means and loopholes to curtail freedom of speech, or intimidation tactics, or making up, rules on the spot. It's the same story wherever we go. They're just trying to shut down free speech on Palestine, specifically like Students for Justice in Palestine, encourage normalization, and kind of make it like very difficult and impossible for people to organize. But to introduce our next speaker and to kind of veer into the professor perspective of this, because we gave you the student perspective, I want to introduce Jonathan Buchsbaum from Queens College, CUNY, and the Professional Staff Congress, who can speak more to this, I guess, like on a professor level and show you like the other side. Yeah.
Thanks, Nerdeen. I'm a full-time faculty member at Queens College, and I've taught at CUNY for a long time. I was also for 10 or 15 years the chapter chair of the Professional Staff Congress, which is the union of faculty and professional staff at CUNY. There are about 27,000 members of the PSC. And I was also part of the leadership of the PSC, the Executive Council.
What is your voice?
Sorry?
Can you speak a little louder, John?
Sorry to hear you. Yes, I can. I think I can speak louder. I'm for a number of years. I was also. Is that better? Yeah. I was also on the Executive Council of the PSC, which is the leadership group of the PSC. And really, that's the reason that I'm part of the panel today, because I was working with a group of students and faculty throughout CUNY that eventually tried to work together for a resolution, which I'll talk about in a few minutes, at CUNY in support of SJP in particular. But I'd just like to back up before I tell that story to add a comment or two to what Leena mentioned regarding corporatization of CUNY, which is not what I'm going to speak about, but I can give you a couple of, I think, salient and kind of shocking details to clarify this idea of corporatization. In the late 70s, CUNY had about 12,000 full-time teachers, and roughly, let's say, the same number of students as it has today, 250, 300,000. And it's 12,000 full-time teachers. Now it has about 7,500. So if you take each teacher, multiply that teacher by 6 or 7, depending on how you want to count, you get the number of courses that are no longer being taught by full-time teachers. Who's teaching them? Adjuncts. So it's really the casualization of the workforce, which is another way of thinking about part of that corporatization, but it's very dramatic, because now more than 50% of the courses are being taught by part-timers who have no job security, and as Leena said, they can be fired at any moment.
And are paid.
So, I mean, it's an extremely dramatic stat, I think, to give you a sense of how that happened. And the idea of CUNY being free was absolutely true. There was no tuition at all before 1975. And then because of the fiscal crisis, let's say a so-called fiscal crisis in 5, they said, well, start making students pay. And that's when tuition started, and it's been going up ever since. And it continues to go up. It didn't go up last year, but that was an exception. I think because of a lot of organizing. It'll start going up, I think, again next year, because CUNY will go back and ask for it. It didn't ask for it this last year. In any event, that's part of the background to the corporatization. But I want to talk more specifically about organizing around justice for Palestine at CUNY, which I have not been very directly involved with in relation to SJP, but I'll come to that in a moment. I, at Queens College, with colleagues in the union chapter there, did try to organize various events around Palestine. And we thought that because there's a very hostile group of Zionists at the college, that we would think through exactly how we wanted to organize our panels or our events. And we decided that we're going to start with Israeli speakers. So we got Jewish pilots, Israeli Jewish pilots, who had refused to serve missions in the occupied territories. These were decorated heroes in Israel. They came to Queens College. Hillel students were out in force. They knew about it. They were tongue-tied. They literally could not string the words together to make a sentence because there was too much cognitive dissonance for them. These were heroes. They couldn't attack these heroes. So that was in certain ways very successful because the pilots, were speaking very straightforwardly. They weren't hectoring anybody. They were powerful, but they were powerful even before they started to speak. We also invited young Israeli women who had refused to serve in the military. The Hillel people were not quite as tongue-tied with them. So it was an interesting kind of gender discrepancy. But nonetheless, those women were extremely effective. Then we had a panel on BDS, where we invited a representative from Jewish Voice for Peace, Center for Constitutional Rights, and an independent scholar. A lot of Hillel students, but also hostile faculty, colleagues of mine, shouted down the speakers, screaming from the audience. It was extremely unpleasant event in the sense that, the civility was non-existent at all. And I was a little surprised by that. In a way. I had private conversations with people, and I saw that some of them were very angry before the event. But I hadn't expected quite that level of hostility, and as I say, especially from faculty members. So that's just to take the temperature, as it were, of what the campus mood was at Queens and why we proceeded in the way that we did. It's a very difficult challenge. But after that, and I guess I should say that, just in all honesty, we didn't have any problem organizing those events. The administration did not interfere at all. And I think that's because we had cover to a large degree. In any event, we didn't have problems with the administration. Now, in the summer of 2014, a group of students and faculty began meeting at the CUNY Graduate Center to discuss this question of pursuing justice for Palestine at CUNY. And many of the participants were working with SJP. And I participated partially in the hope of building solidarity with the PSC, that is the union, which has always supported academic freedom, but had not demonstrated any particular activism around Palestine. Now, sometime later, various events took place at CUNY campuses, including the march that Nerdeen referred to, after which Zionist groups off campus launched accusations of anti-Semitism. And in particular, the Zionist Organization of America whipped up hysteria over these unfounded and uncorroborated charges, and I was stunned to see pictures and descriptions of alleged anti-Israel activity of CUNY faculty and students at a website called Canary Mission. Some of you are probably familiar with it.
Yeah.
I mean, you can do it today. Don't do it right now, but I mean, you can see it. I found over 100 faculty members listed there, and over 1,000 other people, many of them students, probably most of them students.
Yeah, me and Leena are on there.
Yeah.
That's right. I didn't want to name you, but
We were, I think, like, they now have they now have so many students on it, so it's kind of a little delegitimized because it's just like you have hundreds of students on it. But in the beginning, they had like maybe 20. I think we were one of the first ones on it in New York.
Congratulations.
It was scary at first.
it's stunning because they have pictures of most of them and have these lengthy citations from various attacks on what they've done or allegations of what they've done. But I mean lengthy ones. You know, they go on for pages. For students, I mean, you know, they're young. They haven't even yet developed a full bio of activism that might have filled books. In any event, in February, and now I'm going to repeat a little bit of what Leena said, the president of Zionist Organization of America sent a long letter to CUNY Chancellor Milliken calling on him to investigate SJP. I mean, in other words, they were targeting SJP. This wasn't just generic attacks. And soon after that, the Zionist Organization of America sent a letter to New York State Senator attacking a distinguished professor at CUNY for anti-Semitism, Staten Island. So then they appointed these two lawyers, they looked into it, they interviewed lots of, is this for me? Yeah, okay, fair enough. I'll cut to the chase. We, in this group, decided that we would try to write a resolution for the PS task supporting the SJP work at CUNY because, you know, they were working at our university and we wanted to have the union voice of 27,000 members protest these charges, these unfounded charges. And I have copies of this part excerpts from the resolution that we put together and the resolution that was eventually passed almost unanimously by the PSC. And there were changes, and I just tried to indicate some of those changes because they wanted to remove too much emphasis on SJP and make it a defense of academic freedom and come out against anti-Semitism. And that's really what I want to conclude with by saying that there's this incredible disproportion between the reaction to charges of anti-Semitism and virtual silence on the Islamophobia that's very rampant, not only, I mean, throughout the country, but, I mean, in CUNY. And I think that we were successful in getting the resolution passed, but there was a kind of nervousness, I think, among the members, at least the members of the Delegate Assembly, about taking too strong a stance in favor of SJP. So that's just a kind of lesson for the future as we move forward.
offer a further perspective of, the kind of like freedom of speech curtailment and everything that people who advocate for Palestine and also Arabs and Palestinians face across the country. Our next speaker is going to be speaking about this from a totally different region across New York City, on the other side of the country, California. Her name is Alham Muhtaseb, and she's from the California State University, San Bernardino, and she's going to offer you her perspective on what she faced over there and saw.
Hello, everyone. So I'm a professor, but I'm also serving on the executive committee of the California Scholars for Academic Freedom. And this group, I'm sorry. Oh, you want the... okay. Is this good now? Okay. So this group was started actually a little bit after the first Israeli invasion of Gaza, 2008-2009. I mean, the seeds began before, and Rabab Abdelhadi, who's here, professor from San Francisco State University, was actually one of the co-founders. But it started actually as a result of the image that Israel has been since then actually suffering from, a very negative one. And in my presentation, I'm going to try to be brief because I know we have several people talking and we have a lot of audience, so we want to open it up for question and answer. I want to give a positive light to the issue because I'm optimistic. I always like to look at the positive thing. And I think the positive take on the issue of academic freedom and the infringement on academic freedom in terms of the Palestine question is the fact that there is a real paradigm shift in the United States in terms of people awareness of the Palestinian cause. And more and more, the Palestinian side is being exposed to a more mainstream American audience. While in the past it was very, very hard to actually break access to mainstream media, especially because it's corporate-sponsored media in the United States mainly. Now with social media, and I'm not necessarily saying that it's all wonderful about social media, but in a way, it enabled more visibility for the Palestinian voices. And also there is more informed discourse on academic institutions by many professors who started actually breaking into in new avenues of actually educating on Palestine and Palestinian issue. So what I've done similar presentations before, and the main issue here is to document historically, all the cases of academic, the infringement on academic freedom of scholars who are either Palestinian or who teach on Palestine or research Palestine, or the three of them. And of course, those of us who are originally Palestinian or Palestinian American and who teach and research Palestine get like the worst type of infringement on our academic freedom. And I could share with you a few examples. But the group was started in California, and sometimes we actually expand beyond California and send solidarity and support letters on behalf of scholars from other states, like the case of Stephen Salaita, for example, but many others as well. Also, nobody mentioned Simona Sharoni also, and all the FOIAs that she had received, for disclosure of information. But in California itself, of course, we have our big share of infringement. We have a very concerted campaign specifically for the California institutions of higher education. And behind it, of course, there is a huge, really, group of different Zionist organizations, from David Horowitz to, you mentioned, of course, the missions, the Canary Mission, but one of the very aggressive ones is something called the Amcha Initiative, which started probably 7-8 years ago. And if you look at the cases that I document and I look at, they are very consistent, and they have kind of almost a system, of oppression against those scholars. And most of the time, they start with a FOIA or Freedom of Information Act request. The first thing is intimidate the professor and try to silence them. So they go to their academic institutions with, formal requests, FOIAs, and they have been more and more aggressive. So in the past, they would just specify certain for, like they want to look at the emails from scholars around certain cases. Maybe some professors brought, for example, Islamophobia one time, and so they issued FOIAs against those professors at different California institutions of higher education to look at those emails specifically. But now they are going beyond and beyond, and they have the resources and they have the money, and they are well funded. In an article in the New York Times a few months ago, about 6-7 months ago, they actually, which was very unique actually to see an article like this in the New York Times, the LA Times, sorry, that they uncovered, and they did a very good investigative report on who's actually sponsoring and funding those campaigns. And part of it is, of course, the Israeli government, and part of it is like Adelson and others, rich Zionists in the United States. In one case, $20 million only for the California institutions of higher education. So there have been numerous cases. Rabaa Abdelhadi had her own share, of course, over several years. A lot of attacks by Amkha, by David Horst lately, including actually putting her image on posters and plastering them across campus, San Francisco State University campus. And this was done in fall. But another recent attack, which happened just only a few weeks ago, including posters not with her image, and the first ones accused her also of supporting terrorism and things of that nature. And this round, it was indirectly linking her with Rasmiya. I don't know if you know about Rasmiya, the Palestinian American woman who had been going through hell, in a legal battle against, against her citizenship in the United States. So they put her images and kind of tried to indirectly link it to Professor Rabaa Abdelhadi. And there are many, many issues, and they are not only against professors and against professors who teach or research Palestine or who are Palestinian, but also against students. A lot of these are SJP students or GUPS, in San Francisco, etc. So I have to wrap up because I don't have more time, but I would be more than happy during the Q&A to answer any questions or give more details about more cases that we have to deal with. And we have a lot of cases actually over here. Thank you so much.
Our next speaker is also from California. His name is Saliem Shehadeh, based in San Francisco State University, and he's actually going to be Skyping in. I might need to get out of the way.
We're going to play the video first.
Let me know if I should.
No, just you can say recording the video.
I could actually look for I have the best video.
Do you still need that? Voice.
Here.
Talk.
You should tell him we can't hear him.
It's not a real person, it's a video.
Where is the sign-up sheet?
It's here. I was going to make the announcement.
Okay, can you just pass it around?
Yeah, you do it now.
And also,
Okay,
just
while
to
we're
make
waiting.
an announcement while we're waiting, just to make an announcement while we're waiting for the audio to connect. This is part of a broader teaching on Palestine that has been happening all day. So if you're not aware, after this we have another event from 3 to 5 on deadly exchanges, policing resistance movements, prison abolition, and U.S. and Israeli collaboration. So if you're interested in learning more about Palestine and these issues, please attend that as well. Thank you.
Assaults on academic freedom and free speech by focusing on the experiences of Arab and Muslim ethnicities and diasporas. Ahmed studies senior scholar Dr. Rabaa Abdelhadi at SFSU in the past year. These assaults are the product of defamation by racist right-wing organizations that are combined with SFSU's administrators' negligent and often hostile reactions to criticisms of this defamation. The defamation presents Palestinian activism and scholarship as anti-Semitic and linked to terrorism, as it falsely equates criticism of Israel with the hatred of Jews. These organizations then mount legal charges and press for punitive measures. Historically at SFSU, this has included the suspension of Palestinian student activists and rigid revisions to and strengthening of punitive student conduct policies. The defamation and assaults on Palestinian activism and scholarship was renewed with vigor at SFSU in 2013 and continues today. These racist organizations are comprised of a tightly linked network spreading anti-Muslim and Islamophobic bigotry, working with multi-million-dollar budgets. This network includes the likes of David Horowitz, which the Southern Poverty Law Center describes as a driving force of the anti-Muslim, anti-immigrant, and anti-black movements. These organizations push an explicit pro-Israel agenda and receive funding from right-wing Israeli advocacy organizations. Organizations from this network, such as Initiative, Horowitz Freedom Center, Campus Watch, Middle East Forum, and the Canary Mission, have all taken their work onto college campuses. The effect of their work has been an assault on academic freedom as it seeks to protect hegemonic discourses that are supportive of Israel. The term New McCarthyism that Dr. Abdul Hadi coined to describe the systematic assaults on Palestinian activism and scholarship likens them to the 1950s history on college campuses, where communist activism and scholarship were targeted and punished by law. As the fall 2016 semester began, Dr. Abdul Hadi and GUPS were victimized by smear campaigns by this network of organizations. In September 2016, the Middle East Forum launched a petition demanding that SFSU revoke its Memorandum of Understanding, MOU, with An-Najah National University in Palestine under accusations of terrorism. The forum also smeared Dr. Abdul Hadi, who initiated, designed, and proposed the MOU, asserting that she was a terrorist apologist. While Dr. Abdul Hadi organized a campaign to defend the MOU with An-Najah and demanded that SFSU defend the MOU publicly, SFSU's response was muted, too ambiguous, and vague. Tellingly, it did not name Professor Abdul Hadi, who was targeted, or An-Najah, that was also smeared. Instead, it obscured the specificities of the assault on Palestinian scholarship when it made no mention of it, but relegated it to generalities. 2 weeks later, David Horowitz falsely accused SFSU of being one of the top 10 supporting terrorists schools. A week after this smearing was published, the organization escalated its tactics, plastering racist, Islamophobic, and anti-Palestinian posters all over the SFSU campus. On the morning of October 14, 2016, students found a poster with a caricature of Dr. Abdul Hadi, along with the caption, "Jew Hatred." Students found dozens of posters plastered throughout heavy traffic areas of campus. Posters were found in front of the library, the campus quad, Malcolm X Plaza, the entrance to the administration building garage, and the main bus stop on campus. Student-led efforts tore down all of these posters, not the university, who was charged with protecting faculty, staff, and students. President Wong ignored the dozens of petitions and a request signed by over 50 SFSU faculty members to take action. In December of 2016, Vice President Lolo Hong admitted that the administration knew about the posters early in the morning, but chose not to act immediately after posing what was clearly hate speech as free speech. Because the university feared a lawsuit from David Horowitz, who was infamous for his legal harassment, an indication that the university's primary concern was not our protection, but rather insurance losses. On the day the posters were found, President Wong sent out an email condemning them, but making no mention of Dr. Abdul Hadi, GUPS, Palestinians, Islamophobia, racism, discrimination, xenophobia, or anti-Arab and anti-Muslim prejudices. Wong's statement confused those who read it, as they were given no idea what the problems the president referred to. SFSU again offered Dr. Abdul Hadi, as well as the Palestinian students named on the posters, police escorts and counseling services. Its response placed the bulk of the responsibility for protection onto the victims themselves, as the threats were conceived as matters of individual security and psychological issues. Once again, the university ignored urgent requests for university protection that was public, unambiguous, and structural. In response to the posters, Dr. Abdul Hadi, GUPS and supports Palestinian rights, launched a grassroots campaign to demand that the university, 1, conduct a third-party investigation on the university's response, 2, end the hostile work and study environment at SFSU, and 3, build a full-fledged Ahmed program in order to teach what Islamophobia and anti-Arab discrimination are and how to combat them from justice-centered pedagogies. On May 3rd, 2017, another hostile poster campaign of Islamophobic and anti-Palestinian attacks has taken place on campus. This time, it also targeted Jewish Voice for Peace. Refusing to acknowledge legitimate Palestinian concerns, the university has dismissed urgent calls made to institute campus changes and to publicly defend them against character assassination. Further, the university has told us that they refuse to investigate the matter, despite the death threats Dr. Abdul Hadi still receives.
Alright, so not wasting any time, and if you have questions for this video specifically, Bob is also here that can help answer. But just to continue with the
Just turn it off.
There's a thing on top.
to continue with the presentation and with all the speakers, so we have time for Q&A. Our next speaker is Khury Peterson-Smith from Black for Palestine.
Ready? Sure. Thank you. Well, I want to start with three kind of points for framing. That I'll do very quickly. All right, so first of all, a discussion like this is critical about the question of academic freedom in the corporate university situated here in the United States or in North America. It'd be remiss, I think, if I didn't say a word about the question of what academic freedom or the lack of it looks like in Palestine, because the people, the university administrations and the state governments that the governors, as in this state in California, who intervene on questions of what students do and what professors say on our campuses are not only working to squelch our own academic freedom and talk about Palestine or whatever else we want to talk about, but they ironically do it in the name of academic freedom. They claim to be defending academic freedom and so on. It's worth pointing out that actually in Palestine there's a tremendous restriction on the lives of Palestinian students, on the lives of Palestinian academics, and so on. So those university administrators who are so concerned about academic freedom and defend Israel in the name of that should look at what Israel's actually doing to academics and the campuses and the students in Palestine itself. The second point is, and we're kind of getting at this, piecing it together over the course of this panel, but if we take a step back and not only talk about the repression of students and faculty and staff, we talk about Palestine, but what our climate on campuses across this country look like, generally speaking, it's really quite a nightmare, actually, in any number of ways. In terms of, I'm so glad that Jonathan brought up what the labor situation looks like for academic workers at the moment, where they are trying to eliminate full-time positions in favor of adjunct positions, online courses and distance learning, et cetera, et cetera.
for staff, whether that's dining staff or janitorial staff. Universities are subcontracting to private corporations in an effort to eliminate benefits for those workers and to lower their wages. And of course, in terms of academic freedom, what students are allowed to talk about. The fact that students who are students, I mean, it's quite striking in some cases. You think about, I mean, this is true. Students have the right to talk about whatever they want to at any university, public or private, but there's something quite striking about students at a private university paying a lot of money and being told your group is being decertified. You don't have the right to organize on campus for whatever. That's the case for SJP, and that's the case for any number of other campus groups as well. And that comes not only through kind of repression from official channels like university administrations, but also these institutions like Canary Mission and so on. So the last point I want to make for framing is just a word, and I know that this isn't new to people in this room, but the significance of the question of Palestine in this country and really support for Israel in the United States and the centrality of academia in the project of buttressing Zionism here and on the world stage. I think it's important to acknowledge that because it frames why university administrations are so adamant about repressing SJP and faculty who talk about Palestine. Why in Israel they have a conference on boycott, divestment, and sanctions, which they say is the greatest threat to Israel, and so on. Why? Well, it's because the United States is the greatest defender and funder and et cetera, of Israel. And they know that US academia has a particular role to play in terms of producing the kind of ideology that justifies Zionism. And because, of course, campuses are historically and today sites of resistance, and they want to eliminate resistance on the question of Palestine. It's worth saying, too, if we're talking about Students for Justice in Palestine in particular, I'm going to say this, people may disagree. I think SJP is, when we think about student organizing in the United States, it's arguably the best organized student group. I mean, I can't think of a single other group that has nationwide chapters organized on a particular issue where students are networked all across the country. SJP is highly organized, and therefore it represents a certain threat to the people who run academia and run this country, because it brings up questions of justice and what this country supports. So with that, I actually want to spend my remaining minutes by talking not so much about Palestine in particular and the repression of faculty and staff and students who talk about Palestine in particular, but rather where the struggle for Palestine on campus fits into the broader struggles on campus. So in the last panel that we had in this room as part of this really excellent series, Tammy Gold, who works here in the CUNY system, made this point about how there should be the creation of a Palestine studies program here at CUNY, which is a fantastic idea. And she acknowledged that doing so is going to be a struggle, of course. And it's worth noting that, for the reasons that I said and the reasons that we all know, creating a center to study the question of Palestine in particular is going to face a whole bunch of resistance. But it is also the case that there is an attack on ethnic studies in general in this country, right? And so a struggle for Palestine studies and departments that take that up should be part of a broader fight for the defense of ethnic studies in general. Secondly, if we're talking about the question of free speech in particular, there is, of course, a massive attack on those of us who advocate for Palestine on campus. But it is also the case that the question of free speech is a central one on campuses in general. And so one of the things that we've seen really just in the past year or so, ironically, the same administrations that say that they are defending free speech by saying SJP can't organize, that is, by curtailing our free speech, all of a sudden, when right-wingers like Mila Yiannopoulos come to speak, we have to allow him. We can't allow SJP to organize, but we have to give platform for far-right, xenophobic, misogynistic ideologues. And so my point here isn't, it's not that the question of Palestine is simply one of many questions in regard to free speech, but rather the methods the technologies that campus administrations have developed against those of us advocating for Palestine are now being used more broadly to repress free speech on campus, and particularly, I'll also say Black Lives Matter and organizations that are calling attention to anti-Semitism, which I want to talk about a bit more in a second. So, also, the question of divestment of university funds from Israeli apartheid is one that is increasingly bound up with a question of the financial and economic direction of universities in general. That is, campus activists have called attention to the fact that universities are invested in private prisons, are invested in corporations that profit off of fossil fuels, and so on. As well as, I'm sure is the case in the CUNY system, as is the case in universities, private and public across the country, this investment, you can call it that, in the salaries of university administrators at the expense of labor on campus. Investment in facilities at the expense of labor, et cetera. So the question of BDS on campus, on one hand, yes, must call attention to the funding of Israeli apartheid, the oppression of Palestinians that universities are supporting by investing, making those investments. But I think that should be part of, or framed as part of, a conversation around the direction, the financial direction of the university in general, and what's worth investing in general. So I want to end by giving a couple of examples of the interrelatedness of these questions, both a negative example and a positive example. And I want to give one example from Boston at a university where I was talking to students who were involved in the SJP there, who said that they've been working really hard to try to connect with the Black Student Organization, but that the university administration has told the Black Student Organization explicitly, don't work with SJP. You don't want to distance yourself from them. They're too controversial. And instead, work with us. And so the administration is trying to cultivate a relationship with the Black student group, and as part of that, telling them to distance themselves from the SJP. Now, on this same campus, when people remember that at the University of Missouri there was this big uprising because of the just incredible racism on that campus, and it produced this remarkable struggle that ultimately led to student hunger strike, and then graduate student strikes, and then faculty support for the students, and then finally the university football team saying, we're not going to play until the president of this university resigns, and that is what happened. Well, there were solidarity actions on campuses across the country. And at this campus, there was a solidarity rally meant to call attention to what was happening at the University of Missouri, but it was cut short. And so it was like this 5-minute rally. I remember going to them, like as soon as I got there, it ended. And I was talking to them, I was like, what happened? What's going on? I said, actually, the administration is holding this kind of dialogue event. And so the organizers decided to cancel the rally and instead go to this dialogue event. Which is to say that the university's kind of cultivation of this relationship with the Black student group, part of that is getting them to demobilize the struggle actually for Black students, which is to say, choosing to go along with the administration's strategy and distance yourself from the Palestinian struggle not only means a setback for the Palestinian struggle, but it actually doesn't help the Black struggle either. Right. Conversely, when we get together, we're stronger. And so I'm sure there's a number of examples, but the one that I want to close with, is the one that I'm familiar with, is at Columbia University here in this city, where the Black Student Organization, in the face of quite a lot of opposition, has adamantly said we're in solidarity with Palestine, we're in solidarity with SJP, we call for the university to divest from Israeli apartheid, and so on. And on that campus, there developed a number of divestment campaigns. A campaign to divest from private prisons, as well as to divest from fossil fuels. And when the SJP was attacked, when students who were calling for the divestment from Israel were attacked, students who were organizing the other divestment campaigns stood in solidarity with SJP and with the Palestinian struggle. And that, I think, is a positive example of the direction that we need to go in. Thank you.
Our final speaker before we veer into Q&A is Max Isle from Cornell University and the International Jewish Anti-Zionist Network. Oh, and also who has the sign-up sheet? Please continue to pass it around if you're interested in involved or anything, figuring out about more events and how to get involved in the future. Please don't forget to sign in and your email. Thank you.
Okay. Also, I'm passing around a sheet from the Interfaith Peace Delegation, and they take groups of people to Palestine to really see what the situation is. So if you're interested in more information, please sign that sheet and it will.
Can I?
Thank you. Sorry, we just have only like 10 minutes for Q&A, so I really want to get back to our final speaker, Max from IJAN, and then you can take questions at the end. Thank you, everybody.
So I'm going to be very brief because Rabab just asked me to mention things that maybe hadn't been mentioned before, and our speakers were excellent, so there's very long. I'm going to talk a little bit about a report that IJAN put out called The Business of Backlash, which investigated some of the links and institutions that are behind the attacks on the Palestine movement in this country, and they're actually mobilizing and coordinating the attacks that most of our speakers were discussing during their presentations. And I want to bring this up so I can frame the issue in terms of attacks and opportunities. So for example, when we discuss the initiative or the Anti-Defamation League, one way of looking at it is to say, okay, there are Zionists attacking Palestinian institutions or the Palestinian struggle, and this is absolutely accurate, and it should be identified as such. But we should also look at who is behind these institutions, and it's not just ideological Zionists, right? There's actually a group of about 8 multimillionaires and billionaires who are coordinating all of these attacks through a range of intermediaries, who distribute funds to media institutions, to think or to anti-think tanks or thoughtless tanks, to propagandists, to so forth. And some of these are, of course, Zionists, and that shouldn't be forgotten. But some of them are not. Some of them are a lot of them are invested in oil. A lot of them are invested in weapons. You have the Scafee Foundation. You have, you have Adelson, who is a Zionist, invested in casinos. You have people invested in chemicals. You basically have the elite of this country who are coordinating these attacks for a specific reason, and who are not only funding the attacks on the Palestine movement, but who are also funding attacks on various sorts of anti-racist movements, people of color movements, immigrant movements. And the point of these attacks is to do two things. One, they attack these other movements because, of course, these people are billionaires, and you only get to be a billionaire by doing racist and bigoted things. That's the nature of being a billionaire. Money doesn't move itself. You have to oppress people, and that means doing these things. So that's why they attack the non-Palestine movement. They attack Palestine precisely in order to keep Palestine separate and wedge it out, which is then feeds back and becomes another way to attack these movements. And this is what Leena and Nerdeen were talking about beautifully, in that they brought, of course they wanted to defund CUNY anyway, but they claim, okay, CUNY is being so-called anti-Semitic, or the students are, and we're going to attack them for this specific reason, and that's our excuse. But in fact, it's a pretext, right? It's a pretext for defunding the public university that should be used for building up the educational capacities and the learning of the people of this city. And this spurious attack of anti-Semitism is in fact used against them. So I think we can see that organically, they're already working against all of our movements. And they're also working to keep our movements all divided from one another. There are two modes of attack, and it's explicit, right? And it's also, I have no time to go into it, but this is also, they attack anyone on the international stage who speaks out against racism and Zionism, like the Durban process, against racism. They say, get Palestine out of there. And it's also how they specifically attack Latin American liberation struggles, right? They say, get Palestine out of there. But this also leads the way, I think, to a lot of opportunities for building up joint struggle. I'm at Cornell University, and just as an example, although we really did not do a great job of mobilizing around it, unfortunately, but in New York, they mobilized a huge amount of taxpayer money at least $100 million to build up the Technion, which is a tech campus, which has ended up displacing a hospital, and sent taxpayer money when, of course, the MTA is crumbling, and they're sending taxpayer money to build up a tech campus, which is actually going to build up a lot of patents. The patents are going to be privatized. So it ends up using taxpayer money to build up the profit base of the corporations that are going to benefit from those patents. It's entirely absurd, right? And it's actually a concrete way to point out that, and Technion is, of course, an Israeli university. So it's a way of looking concretely at how they're mobilizing and to say, okay, if you guys are mobilizing organically as an elite interest, then it's incumbent upon people organizing against Zionism to not be speaking this talk of how Palestine is an exception, but rather to see how Palestine is exemplary and how it really condenses and concentrates all of the racism of the U.S., both in this country and abroad, and to say, okay, that's kind of the barometer of racism, and resisting Palestine is part and parcel, not just at some abstract level, but a very concrete level of the struggles we choose to build up, and is a very concrete part of building up those struggles so that they can hopefully succeed. Thank you.
Thank you, Max, and sorry everybody, I lied. We actually have one more speaker. Who was one of the main organizers of this event and the teaching more broadly. I want to introduce Rabab Abdul Hadi from San Francisco State University, who's going to add more context about what everyone talked and just speak more briefly about this subject.
I just have 1 minute. Thank you all for coming. This is really great. Hopefully next forum will give us more space next time, because obviously people can breathe in this room, but that's a good thing. So I just wanted to kind of just bring in, add to what people have said about bringing the corporate university, more examples from San Francisco State with the attack on Palestine. So one of the things that have happened with us is that we were promised actually 3 faculty lines when we started the program in 2007. In 2009, the president of the university got upset because Palestinian students organized an event after 2008-2009 Israeli attack on Gaza with Omar Barghouti, one of the co-founders of the Wake-Up National Committee, to speak on human rights and BDS and things of this sort. So what he ended up doing, the president, is canceling the searches for faculty lines that we needed, because we are basically one-person program now. And first canceled the searches, then deleted the lines from the budget completely. Meanwhile, Zionist millionaires contributed over $3 million to start something called Israeli Studies. That's a very right-wing, very racist program. Now we have 3 faculty members in Israeli Studies. We have 1 person in Arab and Muslim ethnicity and diaspora studies program, namely me. We have no budget, we have no staff, we have no people to give courses, and we have a program, we have an academic program. This is very much connected together. The second point I wanted to say is that I actually did file a grievance, so just people would know. I actually have a statutory grievance through the union, the California Faculty Association, and I have a discrimination grievance. And we have actually lined up, it's all public record, so you can actually ask it through Freedom of Information Act. But some people at the university don't like me to say about this, but I mean, they say don't spread the dirty laundry in public, and I say if there is no dirty laundry, you can spread it in public. So, wash up the laundry, there won't be anything. So we filed the grievance, and actually we are waging a big campaign, because it's not just about me. I'm the only faculty member, but actually the students has been, what you're talking about, CUNY, is exactly what's happening to us. They keep changing the policy of time, place, and matter. They keep students. They tell them, like Brooklyn College, you can't have a wall. Then you say they can't have a wall. Then you say put it on the stage at Malcolm X Plaza. Then they say to the students, you can't choke on the floor. You can't use benches. And this is not just against the Palestinian students. Student Council for Intertribal Nations, Black Student Union, League of Filipino Students, MECHA, RASA, all Justice, Students for Equality Education. None of the students can organize campus. I mean, this campus climate is very stifling to us. So we've been organizing, and people have been joining up and working with us. What happened now is that Hillel, along with Jewish Community Relations Council, whose executive director is the spouse of the executive director of the University Foundation, just to see how the money is working together, right? Who was the head of the Jewish club in the Democratic Party, who resigned at his defense of Israel. And JCRC is the one that shut down the Palestinian Gaza Children's exhibit at the Auckland Museum. I mean, it's the same conspiracy together. It's not really a conspiracy because everybody knows. They are actually launching a suit against Palestinian students, accusing them of anti-Semitism. So one thing will wash with the other. So our grievance, because our students have been put on Canary Mission, they see threats, it's been really murder on campus, really horrible. And we had the same report. The investigator that the university hired came out and said there is no anti-Semitism on campus. The university actually did not do things right after the students protested the campus visit of racist mayor of occupied Jerusalem near Barakat in 2016. Students were prosecuted. So we're having grievance, and they are trying to counter by actually, and I'm saying the Zionists are trying. The last thing I want to say is not lost. It's not all lost. Just like PSC, actually we were behind you in PSC, California Faculty Association. We hadn't done anything, but our president at San Francisco State chapter, after Robert's posters came out in October, but now we actually board decision around against all of this stuff, and it doesn't just talk about academic freedom. It actually talks about our rights to be able to organize. And now we have a decision from San Francisco Labor Council, first time in history on this time. So if we are able to enter the California State University campus and CUNY, which is the second, I mean, this is, and people say SUNY is very large too. We can come together as public universities. We can hold them accountable. They say taxpayers' money. What should taxpayers' money go for? Not to educate for justice? I mean, what are we supposed to educate for? For nuclear bombs? We're doing our job. They just need to allow us to do our job and stop harassing us and really link the question of justice. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. We have very little time for question and answer, so I'm going to do one round of 3 questions and then let the speakers continue after that. Any announcements can be made after, but we really want to save time for a Q&A. So if you have a question, we're going to take 3 questions at one time. Please raise your hand. I have one question here, and then I saw you in the back, and then.
So I just really wanted to make a quick announcement. It really has to do with what we're talking about here. There's been a bunch of fascists in New York City who have been saying a bunch of gathering together in order to protest Sharia law. And on June 10th, we're going to organize at Bali Square. So we're asking people who, this is basically an anti-Muslim attack. And we're asking people to come out and protest this horrible, disgusting attack on Muslim Americans. And I'm part of the internationalist group, so if you would like to speak to me about it and support me, I'm going to pass around flyers. And I think you guys should have some time out of your day to go and defend Muslim immigrants.
Thank you for the announcement, but like I said, the speakers have to leave soon, so we want to use the time that they're here for questions. So we have over here.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Asam in Khury, and I live and organize in Philadelphia. My question for anyone on the panel who would like to address it. What are your thoughts about how the event at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill with Rania Khalid was shut down? What are your thoughts on that? My concern is the tactics used to shut that down are very similar to what the right wing does. And I'm also concerned, should she be invited to speak at an HBCU, will those same tactics be used at an HBCU? Historical Black University College.
And we have one question here.
Addressed to from Breeds College. I've already forgotten your name. Professor Buchsbaum. As a longtime labor activist, I'm quite curious about how PSC, did you receive any pushback either from the UFT, that is the public school local, or from NICET, the statewide teachers organization, or from the AFT nationally?
I want you guys to take on these 2 questions. Okay, I guess I can kind of give my thoughts on the first question that was given about. I don't know. I mean, I could also. They could also address about nobody. Yeah, I'm a moderator as well. So maybe don't want me to. But I also have very strong opinions on this. So I think that. Students for Justice in Palestine, like any other political, organization and student group on campus, should be able to have healthy debate. That's what makes our movement stronger. It's impossible to find complete agreement everywhere you go, and I think that this struggle and this debate is what brings us to higher unity, is what makes our movements more consolidated, and is what actually gives us principles and gives us understandings of the politics that we represent on campuses and more broadly. So I think just shutting down that conversation outright kind of stifles that, and it doesn't allow for that debate and that room to grow. So I think that if you guys want to invite her, or if the other campuses should invite her, then they definitely should. SJP is growing, and we're at a cusp in the movement where campuses are popping up chapters. Every year you hear of a new SJP chapter growing, more members are coming, and Palestine, although it's extremely stigmatized now and a lot of students are facing the backlash of it, it's still a signal that we're growing, that we're winning, that we're convincing people to come to our side, because this pushback and this silencing of Palestinians is a reaction to that, because they know that if people actually sat down to hear what we had to say, then they would agree with us and that they would come on our side. So I think because of that growth, it's only natural for disagreements to occur and for a lot of internal issues to come out, but I don't see it as a negative thing. I think it's good to allow these debates to flourish. If anyone wants to add more thoughts on that before Jonathan takes.
Yeah. I'll just respond very, very briefly to that. I think Nerdeen put it beautifully in terms of student groups allowing for a wide range of debate, especially about the U.S. foreign policy and what's done to almost every single country in the world. I think this has to be on the table for the Palestine movement, and I think we're being neglectful if we fail to address it. And some of the dynamics that we were in fact discussing about silencing arose in that specific case. So one of the personnel, Adam Sabra, for example, who was involved in shutting that down, is actually sitting in a chair endowed by America's absolute favorite state in the region, Saudi Arabia. So people are talking about in this way, students heard some, they were actually repeatedly messaged by someone, a tenured professor, sitting in a chair endowed by one of the most reactionary states in the entire world, which is, of course, America's best friend. And so we need to be realistic about what kind of power is sustaining the ability to shut down these debates when we look at who wants to shut these debates down. And it's really bad if we don't, in my opinion.
I can add briefly. So I also disagree with how that was dealt with. And just for folks who don't know, Rania Khalik is a Palestinian-American journalist and activist who has who's really devoted a career not only to raising awareness in this country about Palestine, but also she's done quite a bit of journalism on the plight of black people, oppression of black people in this country, and connections between black people and Palestinians. So she has a career that I have tremendous respect for. She has been speaking more recently on the question of Syria, on which I have some strong disagreements about some of the things that she's saying, but those are disagreements and conversations that we need to have out on the left. And I think that, this whole discussion is about how repressive our university administrations are in terms of stifling free speech. On the left, we need to be we need to fight for space, in terms of free speech, to have out all kinds of conversations. And I just want to say just a couple of other things that I didn't mention, but I just want to say that are kind of intersections that are relevant to a discussion of Palestine in the context of a broader fight for campus free speech. One is the question of sexual violence on campus, which in recent years has been a really heroic struggle on that, and campus administrations want to shut that down also because those administrations are implicated in suppressing the reality of rampant sexual violence on campuses. And the other thing is there's been, since Trump ascended to the throne, a discussion about sanctuary campuses as well. So all of these things are relevant, and I think that, again, while we have to call attention to the particular oppression that the U.S. supports in Palestine, that has to be part of a broader fight for really the direction of the university in general.
Just briefly, in response to the question about whether there was pushback against the PSC's resolution, which I briefly described, Not that I know of, because the PSC is affiliated with much larger labor organizations, which, let's say, we can assume are maybe more conservative than the PSC. But nonetheless, within the PSC, and this is really what my point was, the PSC itself is nervous about taking a position on supporting SJP and justice in Palestine. They support freedom of speech, but they didn't necessarily want to support SJP against these accusations. And it's the disproportion that I think we've been talking about all day, and Rabab was talking about it earlier when she mentioned the idea of indivisibility of justice. I mean, the university, or the union even, shouldn't worry necessarily about responding to these spurious charges about anti-Semitism. They feel that they have to balance the two. And Khury was talking about that earlier also. It's a false balance. But the union felt, I think, that it had to make that kind of response because of its anxiety about its membership. And therefore, I would just conclude to say that what's really important is organizing at a local level. Because to the extent that you can build support from the bottom up, then you're going to have more success in speaking with a stronger voice to the leadership, which is nervous. They're not necessarily unsympathetic, but they're nervous. And therefore, I think it's a very appropriate question, but as far as I know, there hasn't been pushback on it.
Thank you, everybody. I'm sorry, I don't think we have time for any more questions.
I just want to make an announcement. My name is Yusuf Barakat. I was born in Haifa, Palestine in 1935. I became a refugee displaced on my 12th birthday. I will be speaking here in this room tomorrow at noon about the subject. Please attend.
Thank you.
Before we there is I think it's really important that that people don't leave with the impression online or in this room that we are not taking seriously if there are anti-Semitic attacks on campus or in the community. Because by the same token we're doing, and I'm just clarifying that we really take that seriously. Stop not accept this whole equation that is always every single time symmetry and balance and so on, but at the same time, seriously stop again. The third thing is that actually the International Women's Strike was attacked, and then an attack against International Women's Strike by Zionists. They actually referred to campus sexual assault, and they actually criticized the people who were involved in confronting campus sexual assault for seeking refuge as students for justice in Palestine in Colombia, at Columbia University. So we see these connections. I mean, it's incredible. So we really need to come back, to come together and work with each other. And we really need to organize, to sign the sign-up sheet. And there is another panel in this room on deadly exchange.
Deadly exchanges, prisons, happening.